It feels. I mean, the weight. I can feel the weight of this matchup just never happening. It's
well, at this point, fuck it.
Move on.
Yeah.
Do something else.
Like, maybe it would be funny if Khabib from here on out were just never injured again. If he just fought three times a year for forever, and it was just retires. Tony Ferguson putting some bad juju on him that got him hurt.
Maybe that's it. There's something weird about that Tony Ferguson. Maybe he cursed Khabib.
A literal wizard.
I would not be surprised. At least if he had tried a few rituals and spells in his time.
Absolutely. Tony Ferguson, he has spent quite a bit of time with Eddie Bravo.
Oh.
I would be shocked if there were not. Like, Tony Ferguson's YouTube video playlist absolutely includes how to hex somebody. There's at least one instructional video that Tony Ferguson has watched on YouTube about how to hex a person.
Doubtless. I have no doubt whatsoever.
Everybody who capitalizes every single word of a post has looked at some like anti-person magic shit at some point or another.
Yeah, Tony Ferguson owns the Lesser Key of Solomon, but he hasn't gotten around to reading it yet.
Wouldn't that be hilarious if Tony Ferguson were actually like a big Aleister Crowley enthusiast?
Yeah, like a major occultist? That would be awesome. That's the only way. That's the only place he can go that he hasn't gone already. The only like level of weirdness he hasn't openly touched. He should come out as like an out-and-out Satanist. That would be amazing.
Yeah, he's the kind of dude who'd be like, no, I'm not actually a Satanist. I'm just big into ritual magic.
He openly treats it as a hobby, but it's a very weird hobby that he's really into.
Yeah, it's not connected to any wider belief system. It's just a thing.
Just really likes a ritual. Oh, that's awesome.
He's a big time candle guy. Big time candle guy.
Yeah,
severed goat's head.
I think we know what happened to Khabib. Just check Tony Ferguson's trash outside of his house for any lead curse tablets. If you find anything like that, then we found our culprit.
If you know of any magical wells in the Southern California area, then you might want to go looking in one of them for that curse tablet.
Oh shit!
It's gonna be a great cold open, by the way.
It's gonna be an amazing cold open. Yeah, a lot of references that a lot of listeners are gonna understand. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and today's topic is UFC 223. Some things have been happening related to this card. It, in some ways, became more interesting over the Easter weekend. And, let's go ahead and just without further ado, Dr. Patrick, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm sure is on every listener's mind. What's going on? What's happening?
What do you mean?
Why?
I'm looking forward to breaking down how Khabib's going to get past Tony Ferguson's jab. I'm thinking, that's a nice uppercut that he throws, that rear hand uppercut.
Oh, sweetie, no.
Why? What happened? What did I miss?
Oh God. Tony
did
Ferguson
Khabib get injured? Khabib got injured.
Actually. Tony Ferguson is, I blame him for this, but for those who don't know, Tony Ferguson is out of the fight that has fallen through now 4 times. No matchup has ever been, we decided before the episode began, has ever been as snake bit, nor as significant as this one. No matchup this significant has ever been so thoroughly and obviously cursed. Ferguson Khabib is off again, but now it's Khabib versus Max Holloway, and I think we're both kind of okay with that. I mean, it's really hard to be upset at that as a replacement opponent, right?
Sounds pretty damn good to me. I mean, you and I both think very highly of Max Holloway. We both think pretty highly of Khabib too.
Yeah.
And neither of us is like, but I don't know. I mean, sure, there are questions here about what kind of shape is Max Holloway in? What is his weight cut going to look like with 7 days to get down probably from the mid 170s to 155? What is his injury status? Has he been? I mean, we assume that he had been wrestling leading up to what was supposed to be the Frankie Edgar fight. A lot of questions here, but as a Raw matchup, I think you could do a lot worse and a lot less challenging for Khabib than Max Holloway.
Oh, absolutely. You could have had another Daryl Horcher. Like this, yeah, they could have been a lot worse. And just before we dive in on that fight, because we are both raring to talk about it, I'll give you listeners a quick clue as to what the overall topics of today's episode are going to be. This is heavy hands, by the way. Did I say that? Anyway, we're going to talk about Holloway versus Nurmagomedov. Still sort of feels strange in the mouth, that collection of words. Then we're going to talk about the co-main event, which fortunately has not changed, the rematch between Rose Namajunas, strawweight champion. Rose Namajunas making her first defense against the woman she unexpectedly beat, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And then we are going to get into a couple of undercard bouts, namely Mike Chiesa versus Anthony Pettis and Al Iaquinta versus Paul Felder. If you want to hear our thoughts on another two interesting undercard fights, Calvin Kattar versus Renato Moicano, and which other one did we talk about? Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Kyle Bochniak. Listen to last week's episode, segment 2. We talked about it then. So, Khabib versus Max Holloway. As you said, Pat, you could do a lot worse than this as a replacement matchup. The X factors are many. I almost don't want to talk about them. You know what I mean? I almost just want to imagine that this was the fight we were expecting. Everyone's prepared. I don't have to worry about short camps and all of that. And everyone will come in looking like they usually do. And that imaginary scenario is intensely exciting. Because as a style matchup, there's very little to dislike about the idea of Khabib versus Max Holloway. It's hard to imagine two styles more different, more diametrically opposed, and yet beautifully harmonious. These guys belong together in the cage. And I don't know if you feel that way as well, but it's just, this is a style clash that I am desperate to see the outcome of. And I just wish that there weren't additional, asterisks attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought for a while that of the potential matchups for Khabib, Holloway would be one of the more difficult ones out there.
Yes.
Because of his ability to stick and move, because of his ability to keep the pace, because of his length on the feet, mostly because of his really tight footwork.
Mm-hmm. His ability to stand his ground and counterpunch, too, something like Edson Barboza struggles with. But
not just stand his ground and counterpunch, but do that while taking angles.
Yeah,
so
not just retreating.
So he can throw counters as he's cutting angles to the side and he moves well in the pocket, which makes it hard for you to just grab hold of him.
Yeah.
He can be hit in those exchanges and he's comfortable with that. But it's not necessarily a straightforward matter of you draw him out, he throws to counter, and then you duck under for your takedown or your clinch entry. Yeah. He makes it difficult to bridge the gap from you throwing to you grabbing a hold of him in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. And so that's point number one. Point number two is he's pretty good in those really tight spaces when he's countering, of knowing when it's time to stop throwing and when it's time to think about proactively grabbing a hold of you. So because the key to beating a guy like Khabib, a really kind of grimy wrestler and grappler, is to dictate when those exchanges take place, because it's a given that they're going to, and you want to avoid them if you possibly can. But when you get to a point where you cannot avoid being tied up with the other guy, you want to be sure as much as possible that that's on your terms and not theirs. So if you're close and you know the guy is going to try to grab an underhook, you grab that underhook first, or you grab that frame first, or you shoot the takedown first. If you're in a space where that's going to happen, where it's a given that that's going to take place, you're just there, you be the guy to set the terms under which that happens, because that means that then you have a better chance of disengaging when you want to. Max Holloway is really good at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, man. Everything, like this whole discussion is going to be overshadowed in my mind by the fact that Max Holloway does not have a full camp. Can he pull off a Nate Diazian performance on short notice? Perhaps, but the problem here for Max, and I think we do have to discuss, like, what are going to be the things confronting him that aren't just the style matchup? The problem here for Max is that he is often a bit of a slow starter. Even when I think he fights against type and comes out hard, it's clear that he gets better as the fight goes on. And that's a great ability to have against Khabib. But is being a slow starter on short notice going to be a really, really bad situation for him? Do you know what I mean? Is being potentially easier to wear out, potentially slower to get moving, particularly dangerous for a fighter who does tend to work his way into his bouts and who would otherwise, I think, be almost expected to kind of light Khabib up more than anybody else down the stretch and respond to that pace better than anyone else has been able to. Those are the concerns, because all of the aspects of the style matchup that you talk about, yeah, like Max he has a phenomenal understanding of distance. He uses his reach exceptionally well. Unlike a lot of tall, long fighters, he is a very busy body puncher, which, if you recall Khabib's fight with Edson Barboza, when Barboza was going to the body with his shots, that is when he was able to stop some of Khabib's pressure and was able to give him problems, much like the body work that Eddie Alvarez used to slow the roll of Justin Gaethje. Max can do that kind of stuff. He's pretty damn effective in the clinch. He's just got all these answers. It's just that, like, Khabib is going to bring that pace and is going to give you things to respond to constantly. And that was how he handled Edson Barboza. It wasn't by sheer superior technique. It wasn't even necessarily by being like an incredible takedown artist. In fact, in the third round of that fight, Edson was doing a really great job of stuffing takedowns. It was just that Edson didn't get to do anything comfortably. And even though Max is better in uncomfortable spots than Edson Barboza is, how does that change with only a few days to prepare on the heels of an injury that I'm fairly confident is probably mostly healed, because he was, he was surfing on his injury. It can't be too bad. It was just enough to pull out of his last fight. But yeah, Max Holloway's a big ass featherweight. He's going to be cutting, I'm sure, a tremendous amount of weight on very short notice. How does that affect the style matchup in your mind?
Yeah, so these are the X factors. Right? Yeah. These are the things that we have to try to take into account. They're the variables that we're just not really aware of and how they're going to affect this.
Much as I would love to ignore them.
Yeah. I think that Barboza is the kind of guy that when you really get after him, you can break him.
Yeah.
Holloway is not going to break in quite the same way, but he could get broken, if that distinction makes sense. Like the kind of mental pressure that Khabib put on Barboza was far more the problem than the actual physical pressure that he was putting on him. I don't think Max is going to be susceptible to the mental pressure in quite the same way, but the physical pressure,
right?
Absolutely.
There's nothing he can do about that if he's not in shape or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He might not have a choice about getting broken in quite the same way that Barboza eventually, and understandably, that's not a knock on Barboza.
Oh, no.
It's that there's basically nobody in the world who can withstand the kind of mental pressure that Khabib put on him. I think Max Holloway is one of the few guys who maybe could, on a full training camp under the exact right circumstances, like he has the skill sets to do that. On a short camp, I think he still maybe could, because we've never really seen anybody frustrate Khabib except for Gleison Tibau in a weird fight many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
I mean, Holloway is not Gleison Tibau, and Khabib is not the same guy now as he was then.
Yeah.
But Holloway has the potential because of the things that we talked about, because of his clinch work, because of his length, because of his ability to throw, 20, 25 strikes a minute when necessary and maintain that pace comfortably. his ability to counter in the pocket, his ability to dictate things, his ability to avoid takedowns before they happen because of his angles and length and reach.
Mm-hmm. His how comfortable he is pressuring. Like we haven't seen anybody who has managed to pressure Khabib in quite a while. I think it's hard to argue that that's not one of the keys to beating him, is just to take the pressure off yourself by putting it on him. And that's something that, like, that turn is something that Holloway excels at, is turning the tone of the bout from I'm reacting, I'm keeping myself safe, to now you have to fucking worry about what I'm doing.
Yeah, this is one of the things that was intriguing about the Ferguson matchup too, and it was actually what I was planning on talking about today, is like Ferguson also was not easy to pressure, right? Because of his length, because of his jab, because of his constant activity at long distance. You couldn't just plow forward on him. But when you let up on the pressure, when you stopped to think for a minute, Ferguson was just on you. Holloway is exactly the same way, but even more so. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the thing. If Holloway can frustrate Khabib a little bit, if he can shut down that pressure just a bit and create even 15 or 20 seconds of openings, he can exploit that in a way that Edson Barboza, who is probably a better technical outfighter, really could not. Like when Khabib gave Barboza space for a couple of seconds, Barboza couldn't immediately flip the switch and be like, okay, now I attack, right? He stopped to collect himself in those spaces, instead of immediately thinking, okay, now's my opportunity. Now it's my turn to really get after the guy and start throwing. He just does not. Barboza just does not have that switch in the same way that somebody like Holloway or Ferguson does. That's what makes that way more interesting. Michael Johnson didn't have that either. Right.
And Max is like, he is like a resetless fighter. Like he I don't know. It's like he has this ability to see the whole fight tactically. Like at any moment, he's like, okay, here's the opening, and he can just turn that switch from reactive to incredibly offensive. I mean, even I was rewatching some of his fights. I rewatched his Jeremy Stevens fight. I was like, okay, here's somebody who's big and strong, who puts some pressure on him. Not really that similar to Khabib in style, but I was looking for any kind of parallel, because interestingly, like Khabib's never fought a guy like Max Holloway, and Max Holloway's never fought a guy like Khabib. So I was looking for any parallel I could, and that's not like Max's best performance. I think he really, it's not his most impressive anyway. On the surface, he respected a lot of what Jeremy Stevens brought to the table. It was a relatively slow paced fight, still a very smart tactical win by him, but in the last few seconds, Stevens really turned it up. He went out there, he had been out-wrestled in the third round, and he already knew going into it he needed that round, so he started swinging the way Jeremy Stevens does, and Max lit him up in combinations in the pocket. He avoided the vast majority of what Stevens was throwing at him and landed some devastating short shots while moving his head, while moving his feet, but always seeming to be right in front of, or at least right next to, Jeremy Stevens. And like that's something Khabib has never ever dealt with. He's been shaken up a couple times. He has been stalled a few times, but he has never been frustrated and then immediately forced to deal with such an onslaught of problems as Max Holloway can put on people. So yeah, like even on short notice, I still have a lot of confidence in Max's his technical ability, but also like his brain, his ability to not feel pressured and to know how to seize an opportunity when it presents itself. That, Khabib has never faced an opponent who has that in the way that Max does.
Yeah, if this were if Holloway had a full camp for this, I'm still not sure I would pick him outright, but maybe I would. I think maybe on a full camp, I think I maybe actually would pick him over Khabib. On a short camp, I'm not going to, but I just think there's still, oddly, for a guy who's 25-0 and who has now how many fights in the UFC? He's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights in the UFC against a pretty wide array of stylistic challenges. I still have a lot of questions about Khabib.
Yeah.
Mostly for exactly the reason that you pointed to right there. What happens when the script gets flipped on him? And for whatever reason, either because he's hurt or maybe he starts to tire out if he's just not getting his way in a fight over the course of 10, 15 minutes. what happens when that script flips? I mean, I think Khabib is probably the real deal. I think he probably has everything that he's shown thus far, and there's no like little hidden flaw that's waiting to come out. But I do think if he's forced to stop and think in the middle of a fight, if he's forced to go to a plan B, or actually more like a plan C, because plan A is just to back you up to the fence and take you down repeatedly. Plan B is to beat you up with strikes as he forces you backwards toward the fence and then maybe take you down. If he's forced to go to a plan C where he just cannot get close enough to get in on the strikes, you've kept him at the end of a long shot, and you're forcing him to react and respond to that. Mm-hmm. If you're saying, okay, I'm not going to make this so easy for you, you are not going to get close enough to me, and the second that you stop to reset, I'm hitting you with 3, 4, 5 shots. That's the point where I want to know, what is his plan C? How does he react and how does he respond to that? And I don't think there's anybody who's better equipped, aside from maybe Tony Ferguson,
right,
to answer those.
Just don't even mention the fight's off. Okay, we've already decided that fight should never happen. Now it's just the pain of losing it again is too much.
You know, Ferguson is quite a bit bigger than Holloway, right? I think he's probably 10 to 15 pounds heavier. He's got a longer reach. He's tall. He's straight up taller than Holloway is.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, Ferguson's defensive wrestling, like against the fence, Ferguson's defensive wrestling is not that great. In open space where he can move his hips back, he's a tremendous defensive wrestler. Mm-hmm. But in really tight spaces, he's not like a real nasty hold his ground kind of clinch fighter or guy with his back to the fence, whereas Holloway in those situations is extraordinarily good.
Yeah.
Whether the size difference in this case is going to kind of negate that technical edge is another question. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you look back at Holloway's last like 6, 7, 8 fights, it is damn near impossible to get a shot on him in open space. You can try to take him down against the fence, but he's hard to take down there. Against Khabib, I think, you know, if his distance management is on point, if his angles are on point, Khabib could force Khabib to go to that plan C, I guess is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, in a lot of ways, like there are a lot of parallels between, or a lot of comparisons between Holloway and Ferguson, in which I think Max comes out pretty superior. Like striking defense is another one. If we're talking about both guys being slight, slow starters, like Max is a much slighter, slow starter than Tony is. Much more capable of responding off the bat to pressure. And yeah, I mean, really, like, are there any specifics of Max's wrestling that sort of, because the overall feeling, there's this compulsion to just side with Khabib here, which has often been the feeling in his fights, but more so here specifically because of the short notice and the recent injury and the weight and all of that. Because I think I agree with you. Like, I feel like it would be quite likely that I would pick Max Holloway if this were just a normal matchup between these two fighters. I think he does match up stylistically very favorably with Khabib, at least compared to anyone else. But, you know, like, what are the specifics of why Khabib can take Max Holloway down? Like, I don't know. I was trying to think of this. Like, where are the holes in Max's takedown defense that Khabib is going to get through? I was trying to take myself out of the compulsion and all of that, you know, the atmosphere surrounding the fight, and just think about it tactically and strategically as an exchange of psyches and techniques. And Max is really reliant on overhooks and wrist control. To stop takedowns. Is he going to be able to out-pummel Khabib, especially if he's starting slow, especially if he doesn't have maybe the gas tank that he's normally quite famous for?
Yeah, it's that overhook-underhook battle that makes me think that that's where Khabib can make some hay against the fence because of the size advantage, or what we assume is going to be the size advantage here.
You have to assume there's a strength advantage at least.
Yeah. That's probably a better way to put it, as opposed to strictly a size advantage. I don't think there's anybody stronger than Khabib in those scenarios. And there's also, and this is more of a personality thing, I guess, than a technique thing, is that Khabib does not appear to get frustrated if you get away from him. Right. Like, he's not the kind of dude who panics when he gets you up against the fence. He's expended all this energy pressuring you. He's had to work hard to get you there. You manage to get away. It's not like he panics.
Yeah, he doesn't get frustrated when he's stopped, because getting stopped is just part of the process. You go over a speed bump, your car keeps rolling. That's
exactly.
how he feels. You're still reacting to him. You're still fighting his fight even when you defend successfully.
Exactly. And if you give Khabib, say, 3 opportunities in that situation where he's got head pressure on you against the fence and he's got an underhook, and from there he's got, 5, 6, 7, 10 different options for ways to try to take you down. If you give him 3 opportunities to do that, probably 1 out of 3 times he's going to get you there.
Yeah.
Whether it's with, a real sneaky kind of attempted trip and then reshot as you're reacting to that. If it's with just a straight up body lock, like at some point he just manages to lever you down from that position because he's so freaking strong. Or if he doesn't even manage to get you down all the way, he drags you to the floor. You're trying to wall walk your way back up, and he jams the crown of his head into your chin and uppercuts you 3 or 4 times in the body. That's still a win for him. Mm-hmm. So my thought is that Holloway coming in on short notice with a gas tank that's probably going to be not up to his normal standards, albeit still extraordinary by any normal standard. Yeah. In that scenario, I think Khabib is going to get him there 1 out of every 4 or 5 times. And if you give Khabib, that many opportunities, eventually he's going to make some hay, and that's going to be enough for him to win rounds or eventually wear down a tired Holloway.
Yeah. But still,
like the 4th round.
If Khabib just can't back Max up the way he has almost everyone else, again, the contrast between how Max responds to pressure and how Edson Barboza responded to pressure is strong.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Well, I guess this isn't really playing devil's advocate because Khabib is the favorite, but let me put it to you this way. My concern, actually, to kind of give you a hot take here, my concern is not so much with Holloway's gas tank, though that is a concern, as with the fact that he probably hasn't been sparring a lot in the last 6 weeks since he went down with that injury. Yeah, and the issue there is, again, not so much the gas tank, not so much like Holloway is a scrapper. I'm not worried about him not being willing and able to throw back. It's not even really with his timing, because I think his timing is something that he gets when he sees you live more than it is something he's drilled in via sparring sessions and pad work. Sure. What concerns me is the distance management. It's his sense of where Khabib is relative to him and what he can throw at any given time. So, and that is something where sparring is very helpful. Right, where if you've been doing a lot of sparring, you have a real good natural sense of where you are relative to your opponent and where you are in the space of the cage, when and how you can move, what angles you can take. Having done a lot of sparring and prep for a big fight, that's very helpful to get a sense for those things. Mm-hmm. So my concern is less with the gas tank, because I think Holloway's been doing this for long enough that he knows what he can do in terms of output without tiring. Yeah,
and we also know, as we saw with Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor, with an experienced fighter, gas tank is often more a factor of mindset than it is somebody who's already an athlete who's usually in shape. It's often, as long as he doesn't freak out, he's not going to gas because he can control himself.
Yeah, Holloway's not the kind of dude who gets fat between camps either. You know, that's not so much my concern. But my concern is with those other kind of intangible things that you have to have been training. Mm-hmm. You have to have been trying to understand spacing and distancing and how to move in the space of the cage and how you're going to deal with somebody who's coming forward on you. Which, even if if he was wrestling a lot in preparation for Frankie Edgar, the directionality is different. Sure. Where the shots are coming from and where you are relative to the cage, what you have to worry about in the spaces in between with those guys is much different. So I guess if you're asking me to pin down specifics of when and where and how I think Khabib wins, it's less with any 1 or 2 tactical scenarios as it is with the kind of snowball effect of that I think Holloway is going to find himself on the fence more than he cares to. And if you find yourself on the fence more than you care to with Khabib, eventually Khabib is going to make that happen. But sure. I think you're right. I think it is helpful to get out of the mindset of, short notice, injured, hasn't had a lot of time to prepare, short time to make what is probably a 20-pound weight cut, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think your instinct is a good one there, Connor.
Yeah, Bill, because, we're analysts. We've seen Khabib's fights, and I think there is a natural feeling for both of us to we want to resist the urge to just be like, oh, it's inevitable. We've learned that lesson. You know what I mean? We've had Ronda Rousey. We've had fighters who we just see them basically winning the same fight over and over, and we're like, well, that's how all their fights go.
Francis Ngannou.
Sure, yeah, and
as painful as it is to bring that up.
Yeah, we have made those mistakes, and there is still this is going to be a whole heap of cliches, but every single round begins on the feet. There is still several nodes, to borrow Greg Jackson's parlance, between where every round begins and the kind of fight Khabib wants to be having. And Max Holloway is, perhaps more than any other fighter in the UFC right now, really, really keyed in to those nodes, to understanding, controlling, and or bridging that distance for a grappler who's relatively upright and sort of fights like a striker until the moment he's wrestling you. Khabib is like, he's gonna be there to be hit by a guy like Max Holloway coming in, and if Max doesn't allow the snowball to start rolling the way that Edson did, if he doesn't respond so defensively to Khabib's pressure and stands his ground, sidesteps, stays close without giving a target to Khabib, how does Khabib get to his kind of fight if that starts happening more and more? There are windows.
This is kind of the mistake that I think Barboza made in fighting Khabib, was in meeting pressure with volume. Right. Sure. It was that he basically tried to scare him off with that. Like, he kept trying to move, he kept trying to avoid those. But when it became clear that he could plant and throw, that's what Barboza did. Whereas I think Holloway's slow starting, now this is actually me playing devil's advocate, Holloway's slow starting may actually be a benefit here, in the sense that he's going to that he might try to just deny Khabib the pace that he wants from the opening bell of the fight.
Just stay in center of the ring, sidestep him. Don't let him get anything off. Yeah.
Just avoid those exchanges entirely until you get a sense for where he is. And then like what he did to Jose Aldo in both fights, I think was just masterful strategy.
Yeah.
Right. Where you have to avoid against Aldo. I think Holloway did a great job of avoiding the trap of just throwing everything out there from the opening bell. Like, he showed Aldo very slowly but surely more layers to his game and more layers to his distance and different angles. And like, he built the momentum very slowly in those two fights, especially in the second one. You would think that, like, the way that he beat Aldo the first time, Holloway's reaction would be, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to just blast this motherfucker. And instead of doing that, he took his time even more so.
Yeah.
He was even more patient than he had been in terms of in their first fight.
Which is like something you can't say about fight. I mean, we've praised the intelligence of guys like TJ Dillashaw, but even he fell into a messier fight when he rematched Renan Barão. Max Holloway had the same damn fight when he rematched Jose Aldo. He was like, well, that was perfect. Do it again. And he did.
Against probably a sharper Aldo. The second time, I thought Aldo Aldo was better in that second fight than he had been in the first one.
Aldo, I will emphasize this. Aldo looked amazing defensively in that fight. He was there was some of the best pure technique we've ever seen from Jose Aldo. He was so sharp, and Max just perfectly understood what kind of fight he needed to beat Jose Aldo.
Yeah. So that, more than anything else, is why Holloway has a good shot here. I mean, I see Khabib is now opened at like a 5-1 favorite. That seems way high to me, even given all those caveats. Like, Holloway's path to victory here is just too obvious and clear. And at least to me, maybe it's just because we really like Max Holloway and we have spent a lot of time thinking about Holloway. And you and I think, have also at various points discussed this matchup before. So
probably
I don't know if we're seeing something that everybody else isn't, or if we're just talking ourselves into something that we really like here. But again, Khabib should win for all the reasons that we laid out. But I think you and I both think Holloway has a better shot at winning this fight than a 5-1 than Khabib is a 5-1 favorite would suggest.
Absolutely. I'll frame my pick this way. I'm going with Khabib, and I hope this is the first installment of what turns out to be a thrilling trilogy between these two guys. I hope that Max Holloway loses, but shows what he is capable of, to the degree that we're like, okay, we need to run it back. And then that sets up Max Holloway versus Conor McGregor too. I mean, so many things could happen, Pat. So many exciting things. You're going with Khabib as well. That seems fairly clear.
Yeah, I mean, but I have a lot of caveats here. There's a lot of things that worry me about this matchup, in a way that they didn't necessarily about a Ferguson-Khabib matchup.
Yeah, and I still waffled a bit on Ferguson. Like you, I still have so many questions about Khabib. It's impossible not to have questions about a guy who has just sort of had the same fight over and over and over. Different shades of, but always having his fight. And you have to wonder, like, what happens, as you phrased it, what happens when the script is flipped? And we just don't know yet. So, yeah, there's a window there for Max. Very exciting matchup. Hopefully we get to see it again after this, no matter what happens, with both guys fully prepared. And that'll be it for segment 1. We hope you guys are as hyped as we are.
I had one more thing I wanted to say on this, because I just by way of summation.
Sure.
The question with Khabib, and I think the kind of the problem that we have when you're analyzing a fighter who has had the kind of career that he's had, or a guy who's on like just a crazy ass run, right? Yeah. The question that you often find yourself asking is, who can win that fight? Who can win the fight that all those other guys have lost? And the question, and that's actually, I think, kind of a flawed way of approaching it. The question isn't, and this I think is the flaw that we ran into when the kind of systemic flaw that we ran into when we were discussing Ngannou Miocic. Is that the question isn't who wins the fight that this guy has been winning over and over and over again. It's who wins the entirely different fight that is not the fight that guy wants.
Who can force him not to have that fight?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to make that as clear as possible.
Seriously, maybe that's Max Holloway. We both think that. So yeah, very exciting. And again, hopefully it's not the end of this pairing, because it is one I have thought about many times before, and I'm very excited at the idea of it, and I just wish all those asterisks weren't there. So hopefully we do get to see this matchup again someday without all of that. And then maybe in a distant dreamland, Ferguson versus Khabib will actually happen too. We can always dream. But let's go ahead, wrap up segment 1. When we come back, we are going to get into another very exciting fight. One that... it's Rose versus Joanna too. So we're going to talk about that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about the co-main event. I guess these are both still title fights, but this is the one... I don't know. That isn't weird. Rose Namajunas won the strawweight title, the UFC women's strawweight title last year from Jędrzejczyk in a very unexpected first round knockout. And now they are rematching. The dominant former champ, Jędrzejczyk, coming back to hopefully for her win a fight that she was heavily expected to win the first time around. I guess, Pat, we should discuss this from the perspective of revisiting the lessons we feel that we learned from the result of the first fight, and how does that change the dynamic of the matchup this time around?
So I think what we learned is that Rose has a little more pop in her hands than we thought she did, maybe.
Yeah.
Because prior to this, you knew that she had kind of cumulative power, right? That like if you looked at the face of an opponent after 3 hard rounds on the feet with her, there would be marks, you know. She would have done some damage. Like Karolina Kowalkiewicz's face was not clean after going 3 rounds with Rose.
And you knew she could snap someone's head back. You knew that there was some nice form to it, that she was fairly accurate. Like the quality of her boxing was obvious in a lot of previous fights, but she hadn't knocked anybody out with a punch in the UFC before this.
Yeah, what was really striking to me about that performance was not even really the pop so much as it was the distance. It was like Joanna could not, who is used to being able to set the distance and command the distance in the range, she could not do that against Rose. Rose was always just right outside where Joanna was throwing.
Yep.
Always. Like, Joanna had so much trouble landing a single dang thing in that.
And Rose, sorry, go on.
Oh, I mean, maybe if the fight had gone on, then Joanna would have gotten a better sense for that distance.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe she would have adjusted. She probably would have done better than she did over those first 3 minutes as the fight went on. But like, it was really striking how Rose knew exactly the distance from the opening bell, and Joanna was desperately trying to find it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I take away from that fight, in retrospect, that I didn't fully account for before the fight, was the difference that Rose's reach would make. And I think that's a lot of it. Like, there are small things we will discuss here, but have discussed for a while. You know, Rose's mental makeup and how that's slowly changing as she sort of matures, both as a person and a fighter. Those are factors. But the fact that Rose is a capable boxer, and has been for several fights now, has been for a couple years now, I think, and getting better all the time. The fact that she is a capable boxer with serviceable footwork, who understands, you know, how to set herself up in a position to hit somebody. Joanna has never dealt with somebody with that level of boxing skill combined with that kind of frame. And I sort of, like Joanna, I think, treated the first fight much like the Joanna's fight with Jessica Andrade. I was thinking, well, she probably doesn't want to box with Rose. Joanna's boxing is not her best skill set, especially when you take into account things like head movement, just sort of hand defense in general, and, tight, fluid combinations that aren't just kind of rushed to set up kicks and things like that. I knew that she would probably not want to engage willingly there if she could avoid it, and that she would want to clinch, as she did against Andrade, beat the pressure or whatever by clinching, closing the distance on her terms, and kick, where she is a very good kicker with excellent footwork. And that changed from the Andrade matchup to the Rose matchup, I think primarily because of Rose's reach. That Rose was able to touch Joanna early and often when Joanna had yet to find her own range. Because I think we can decisively say about Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she is a slow starter. And maybe doesn't have the best chin in the world, but when she does get dropped or stunned, it tends to happen early. And she tends to get a handle on the fight and really understand the flow of the exchanges and the distance better with each passing round. Whereas you could say with Rose is kind of the opposite. I think essentially what we said after this happened on our post-fight show was that, Rose was always probably going to have a big first round, and she just had a bigger first round than we expected. So how does Joanna adjust to that in your mind? How does she?
So I disagree just a little bit with your assessment. Because I think you're right about the reach. But I would say the X factor there, more than the reach, was the athleticism, right? Because it's not just that she could fight at that long range. It's that she was so easily able to move in and out, both past and then behind Jędrzejczyk's reach, right? So she could dart in and out with those 1-2s and those jabs, straight right hands, left hooks, all that good stuff. She could just dart in and out with those at the very end of Jędrzejczyk's reach, right? So she didn't have to be trying to pressure, which is what I think Jędrzejczyk probably expected, was that Rose was going to have to try to get past her reach, when instead she could hang out beyond the reach and then dart in and out at will, which, like, Claudia Gadelha could not really do. Gadelha is athletic, but she doesn't have that kind of, like, in and out straight line kind of athleticism in the way that Rose does.
Yeah,
she's like, also Rose is extraordinarily fast.
She's also got little T-Rex arms compared to Rose. I mean, I think they're probably both factors. I think they're both factors. But it was like I have experienced this, being somebody who's some people don't like it when I bring in my own harrowing sparring stories. They're not very impressive. But being somebody who is like overweight, if I spar somebody my weight, they're usually much taller and longer than me, and I could just see the way that Joanna, like she never had before, was forced to react, was constantly guessing what was coming next. And even though she was actively adjusting to what Rose was doing, like we talked after the this fight, the first fight, we talked about how she was trying to counter in combinations. She was trying to keep up with and adapt to how the fight was unfolding. She was still doing it according to Rose's terms. And I think, athletic ability and reach both factor into that Joanna was kept on her heels like she never had been before, because here was somebody who could hit her, again, early and often without her being able to respond in kind. She was not dictating that fight.
It always fucks up tall fighters when you don't when you like jab with them or set range with them. Like that's why you always because I too, as somebody who was not skinny, whenever I would go with somebody who was again of roughly similar weight, my experience was very similar to yours. It would always be with somebody who was at least 2 or 3 inches taller. Yeah. And somebody who's 6'2" or 6'3" is used to just being able to set the distance. So it always fucks them up when you kick with them, when you jab with them, when you throw straight shots at them, as opposed to just bullying forward and trying to get into the pocket.
Look at Ali versus Kenny Norton. Like Norton jabbing with Ali really, really fucked up Ali's sense of distance. One of his worst looking performances as a result, where he was really flat because Norton just kept jabbing with him, kept taking his reach factor away from him. And
same way as it always screws up a short pocket fighter when you agree to exchange with them.
Sure.
Like they're just not used to having people consent to fight them on their terms.
Yeah. Holloway exchanging with Stevens, that kind of thing.
But it's but the Namajunas Jędrzejczyk is kind of a weird mashup in that they are both really pure boxer punchers, right? They're both like jacks of all trades, where they can stick and move when necessary. They can pressure when necessary, but really they don't mind being out in the center of the cage and just kind of, throwing shots, occasionally exchanging, sitting down on 1-2s, jabbing, like just doing the whole kind of let the fight come to you thing. And I think in the rematch for Jędrzejczyk to win, I think she needs to take a more defined role. Either she needs to decide, okay, I'm going to sit on the outside and establish a distance and especially kick from that range, or I'm going to get after her. Like I think it has to be one of those two, because in the kind of fight that we saw, if Jędrzejczyk doesn't get knocked down, maybe by the end of the second round, into the third round, she has started to use her wealth of experience to put together better combinations. And she's still probably getting hit more than she wants to, but she's clinching more. She's landing some knees in there. She's finding ways of kind of turning the tide of the fight in her favor. But that's probably a slog, and that's probably a war, And what you're betting on at that point, if you're Jędrzejczyk, is that you're going to win the war. And I think she has the tools in her toolbox. I think that this doesn't have to be a war.
Right. She can game plan around the problems that Rose presented. Yeah.
Because instead of thinking that the advantage that you have is just you're a better striker than her and you're going to outstrike her, the advantage needs to be, I have been doing this for 2 decades and I know how to pressure. I know how to cut you off. I know how to get into the pocket and exchange. I know how to move from the pocket into the clinch. I know how to do all of these things better than you do. I know how to get into the clinch and just blast you with elbows. Yeah. Like that needs to be her thought process instead of I'm a better striker than you are.
Yeah, because she essentially, like in the way that like Andrade paralleled with Kowalkiewicz as an opponent for Joanna, like Joanna parallels with Kowalkiewicz as an opponent for Rose. What Karolina Kowalkiewicz did to Rose is eminently doable for Joanna, and she doesn't have to take as many shots as Karolina did to fight that kind of fight, to get that kind of fight on her terms. And I think really like that's the adjustment I'm expecting. That is what I expect, because we know we can say a lot about how far Rose Namajunas has come, and she's still only 24, 23. Is she 23 still? I think she might be. She's 25. Okay, 25. Okay, she's still quite young, right? And she's really like just probably coming into her prime, what will end up being her prime, and it might be a fairly long one. But I think we all still think, like, we've seen the Karolina fight. We saw the Esparza fight before that. We have seen Rose crumble a bit under pressure, and she has, we've talked about this before, she has, I think, pretty decidedly moved past the point of pressuring herself into defeat. I think we saw that with the Paige Van Zandt fight. She's not going to let a fight slip out of her control if she can help it and frustrate herself because, for example, she's not getting the finish or whatever. But is she past being mentally broken when somebody else takes the fight away from her. I don't think so. Until I see her withstand a really like pressure-focused inside fighting game plan, I will expect anyone who can effectively fight the Kowalkiewicz fight against her to beat her, which is why I still think like Rose should almost perhaps be grateful that she's getting her first defense against Joanna and not Jessica Andrade, who I think would be a nightmare for her, would quickly become a living nightmare, a waking nightmare rather, of a fight. So can Joanna put that kind of pressure on Rose? Can she get in her face? Can she force the clinch? Perhaps more importantly, how early can she do that without having to wade through the ends of Rose's reach, without having to make herself a target? You know, like, is she going to be really vulnerable if she just decides to kind of deny her usual slow start, fearing Rose's fast start, and tries to put the pressure on her right away? Is that going to put her in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, the question for me is not can she, because I think we know she can.
Sure.
We have seen that from her in the past. We saw her go after Carla Esparza. We saw her go after Jessica Penne, especially as those fights went on. We saw her go after Claudia Gadelha in their second fight as the fight went on. The question to me is, will she? You know, I never really thought of Joanna as a head case type of fighter until the lead up to the fight with Rose, the first fight with Rose, and now what she has said since then. And I don't know how much of that is bravado and how much of it is like she genuinely doesn't seem to understand what went wrong, because it was not just her getting caught.
How do you mean? Can you give us, what are a few examples of like what she's been saying?
Just the way that she was like going after Namajunas about the mental health stuff, and now and in the aftermath of that, leading up to this, she's been very much like it feels very much like she's looking for an excuse as opposed to pointing to a factor. Like there's a kind of a difference between saying, you know, I understand now this was an issue, and this was an issue in my performance that contributed to the result, versus this is why I lost.
Yeah. We don't know what she's saying behind closed doors, but we do have her publicly saying, you know, I still blame the weight cut. Yeah. I still blame this. And does that indicate that she's not going to change her approach?
Yeah.
She's just
that's
hoping
the part that works.
I'll have a better cut this time, and so I'll fight the same way and win this time.
Yeah, and so those are the kinds of things that worry me. And also, we don't know how Jędrzejczyk reacts to a loss in MMA. I mean, she's obviously lost in kickboxing before, and that didn't stop her from, having a good career as a kickboxer. But this is not kickboxing. This is MMA. She's not fighting in front of 1,500 people in a gymnasium in Poland, or 100 people wearing headgear fighting in some like weird ass tournament in Russia somewhere. Like this was in Madison Square Garden in front of an enormous audience with the whole world watching. So that's a much different way to lose with all of the possibilities of the world open to you if you win. You know, like if she had beaten Rose Namajunas after talking all that shit with all that media attention, Joanna Jędrzejczyk might have finally gotten over the hump to be the star. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I can tell you that there were fairly major media properties that were looking at doing focuses on her had she won that fight. You know, that they were looking at doing like big time things and kind of making her a centerpiece of like of kind of big time stories that would have reached millions of people.
Would have been hard not to with how marketable still the very novel idea of women's fighting is, and the fact that was what, her 6th title defense.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think it's hard to overstate how much kind of pressure there was.
Yeah.
And if she just kind of files all that under it was the weight cut or it was this or what have you, like, then I think she's kind of missing then I think she's missing some important things, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
So that's more than the can she? Yes, she absolutely can. Joanna Jędrzejczyk can win this fight. You could probably make the argument that Joanna Jędrzejczyk should win this fight. Will she? I think that depends on a lot of factors that are not necessarily going to show up on the tape.
Yeah, okay, so let's make picks. What's it come down to for you, man? I can pick first if you prefer.
No, I'm. You've got me on the spot here, but I think it's good to make a pick on the spot. I am picking Joanna, simply because unless her chin is actually shot, I think that she is capable of making those adjustments. I do not think that she is a kind of a Ronda Rousey type where when she's broken, she's broken. I think Joanna has lost before a bunch in a bunch of different things. I think she's got a really good team around her. I think she's got an incredible depth of skill. And as good as I think Rose Namajunas has become, I think if this is a striking matchup and a clinch matchup and not one where Rose can work takedowns, if Rose does not finish her early, then it is going to turn into the kind of fight where Jędrzejczyk's depth of skill and adaptability plays the deciding role.
Yeah.
Which is more or less what I thought about the first fight. So
just with like more emphasis on everything now.
Yeah, and with more emphasis on kind of like if Jędrzejczyk is the kind of fighter that we think she is, that we have believed she is over the last couple of years, then she should make those adjustments.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, it is possible that Rose is just like her anti-fighter. Like, it's possible she could lose here and fight another fight, go up to flyweight and have another great run. That maybe Rose is just the fighting Harada to Joanna's Ader Joffrey. Could be. But yeah, it does feel like it means a lot, you know, and it's sort of like all of the great things we had to say about Joanna are at least partially resting on the result of this rematch. I'm going to agree with you. I am going to go with Joanna as well, with more or less the same caveats. If her chin is really an issue, if Rose gets that same kind of fight, but I think that we can, for one, we know that Joanna is not as much of a head case as Ronda Rousey. You know, if she was, she would have lost the rematch with Claudia Gadelha. You know what I mean? Like, when it started that badly and she had essentially 2.5 rounds from the opening bell in which she was not getting her way, it took 4 minutes of that for Ronda to be exhausted against Holly Holm. Joanna held it together and found her way into that fight. So she's not that far gone. She's not that fragile. She does have a chip on her shoulder, and I think that chip probably comes from the same tree as the one on Ronda Rousey's shoulder. But she also has American Top Team rather than Edmund Tarverdyan behind her. She has Mike Brown to help game plan and guide her in this fight. So I think we can confidently expect something different in her approach, not just, the weight cut went better, so hopefully this fight goes fine. And as long as all those pieces are in place, yeah, I still have not seen Rose Namajunas decisively deal with her own core mental issue or with her own sort of insecurity. I think that will come back to haunt her after this fight. You know, like as soon as the first round ends, that might put Rose in a position where Joanna's pressure is going to start having a serious effect on her mentally, because she's like, oh shit, I got lucky the first time. Now Joanna's hitting me. Now she's forcing me into the clinch. Now we're going strength for strength in close range. Now the fight's uncomfortable. And the first one was all easy. So, yeah, I am picking Joanna. I cannot count Rose Namajunas out. How could you, after the way the first fight played out? But I do think many of the factors that had me picking Joanna the first time are still true. And now, often the loser has the benefit of learning from their mistakes. Rose may come out expecting sort of the same thing. So, I'm going with Joanna. I'm very excited for this rematch, even more excited than I was for the first one, because that's what upsets get you, is excited. And that means that's it for segment 2. Main event, co-main event covered. UFC 223 still has so much to offer. And with that in mind, we're going to take one more break. And in segment 3, we are going to discuss Michael Chiesa versus Anthony Pettis, a sort of weird but meaningful lightweight battle. And then also, oh my God, Iaquinta versus Paul Felder. It's always the last one I screw up on. After this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, I guess we're started. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Which one of these we want to talk about first, Pat? Which one is the juiciest? Iaquinta versus
let's talk about Pettis the Elder.
Okay, it's clearly not the one that I keep forgetting who both of the guys are. Iaquinta versus Felder. Yeah, let's talk about Pretty Tony versus Ugly Michael Chiesa. An interesting matchup. I have a lot of questions in my head about how this one is going to play out. What's your general take on it?
So I think a lot of this depends, as do all Pettis fights at this point, on how willing and able Chiesa is to pressure him. That is the only factor that seems to matter in an Anthony Pettis fight these days is can you put him on his back foot? And Chiesa can. I don't think Chiesa is especially good at that though. I think he is.
Yeah, will he? That's the thing is I don't have a lot of confidence in the game planning of Rick Little and his ilk. I can imagine. Here's the thing. For this fight, I went and rewatched Chiesa's fight with Dariush, which, in retrospect, I think is a much more impressive performance from Chiesa. At the time, I think the general feeling was, Dariush shouldn't have gone for that takedown. He was dominating this fight. Dariush got really, really tired in the first round of that fight. That was very clear to me on rewatch. His legs were getting heavy, punches were getting labored, the misses were taking a toll on him. Every time he missed, you could see the regret on his face that he hadn't connected because it would have felt so much better, both physically and mentally. Chiesa, even without putting much pressure on Dariush, was able to force him to fight a pace. The question is, for me, with Pettis, is the problem the pace, or is it really just the actual physical pressure? Is it really being trapped and corralled and put into a position where you have to react to the guy in front of you? And I think it's probably that. We've seen... I'm concerned because we've seen conditioning issues out of Anthony Pettis lately. Are they just because of the cut to featherweight? Or is Anthony Pettis maybe physically falling apart? Is he having a Shogun sort of moment in his career now where being this super athletic guy who experienced lots and lots of injuries and surgeries, is he now no longer the durable athlete he once was, and can pace alone have the effect on him that we expect pressure to?
I don't think pace alone can do it because I think Pettis has gotten better at working at pace and throwing volume. Not ideal at it, but if he is not being forced to fight in ways that do not agree with him temperamentally, he is perfectly capable of working at a good clip. We saw that in the Jim Miller fight.
Sure. Yeah.
Pettis was perfectly able to work at a solid pace, to throw good volume, to throw good combinations. It's just a matter of, is he being pressured? And we saw that on the feet against Poirier. When he was on the feet and when he wasn't being forced backwards, he was okay.
Yeah.
He's still flawed. He's still fatally flawed. And not just because of the pressure, but Poirier, Pettis is fatally flawed in the pocket too. But Poirier is one of the best pocket boxers in that division and one of the better pocket boxers in all of MMA.
Yeah.
So
and also getting a big ass hitter.
Yeah, getting pieced up in the pocket by Dustin Poirier is nothing really to be ashamed of. Getting pieced up in the pocket by Michael Chiesa, on the other hand, would be something would be kind of a problem. Not that Chiesa isn't willing or able to throw, but he is not Dustin Poirier. Yeah. He's not even Jim Miller when it comes to throwing in the pocket.
He's weirdly effective though with his hands, and he has gotten better. Again, watching that Dariush fight, comparing that in my head with when Chiesa weirdly rocked Masvidal a year or two prior, that was just sheer weirdness that caused that stagger out of Masvidal. It was just the bizarre way that Chiesa holds himself all tight and then he just unfolds. And he has this tremendous frame that seems to come out of nowhere because he doesn't look like he's in position to use it until he starts trying to use it. Against Dariush, he was a lot tighter, technically. His hands were in better defensive position. He managed distance better with his feet. He responded instantaneously over and over, yes, with the same left-hand counter, but he was not he was clashing with purpose with Dariush in those exchanges. And
his frame is when a praying mantis unfolds its limbs. It's real weird that you just extra inches keep popping out. It's very strange.
He surprises people in a lot of fights. We're oh shit, that's his reach. And I don't know, it does make up for what is otherwise a really weird, shaky collection of striking techniques. And I just
He fights like a guy who's had a lot of hard sparring sessions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like this is a type that we've talked about a lot on this show, is that there is a type of fighter who is not necessarily the world's most technically gifted, but they've just been in lots of wars and they know in the gym, and they know that when you get thrown at, you got to throw back.
Yeah.
Right?
They have had a clear understanding of positioning and how their own game works beaten into them.
Mm-hmm. Literally. And I think based on what we know about those gyms that he's spent time at, we know that to be true. Anthony Pettis has had a similar kind of experience, but Pettis also has a better technical striking arsenal to fall back on. The worry here is if Pettis just gets himself backed into the fence, clinched, and thrown on the ground and take it and kind of out-grappled by a guy who is, by any metric, a really good grappler.
Yeah. And not a guy who will very likely not give him the chance to play a lot of guard. Pettis does have a good front headlock series. He's got an excellent guillotine, in fact, but he does get a lot of his work done out of the guard when he's on the ground, and Chiesa doesn't really sit around in people's guards. Like, if he commits to a position on the ground, it's usually your back.
Yeah, even if he did, trying to triangle a guy who's 6'1" with good posture and long arms is not easy to do.
Yeah.
Trying or armbar that guy, like that's, and against a guy who knows what he's doing and who knows how to play in guards. Mm-hmm. Like, he is, like, again, there's a lot of weird shit that Chiesa does on the feet, but I don't think you need to worry about him on the mat getting soundly out-grappled, getting soundly outworked while inside Anthony Pettis' guard.
No.
Like, if he gets taken down or he gets into kind of a weird scramble, then Pettis could probably do some work. Like, Kevin Lee, I don't know, how would you rate having just seen Chiesa get taken down and have his back taken by Kevin Lee, could Pettis do that in a scramble?
I don't think so. I don't think Pettis has the wrestling of Kevin Lee. I certainly don't think he has the physical strength of Kevin Lee.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, I don't think he can scramble with a guy like Chiesa. Like, Pettis' grappling gets underrated a lot. He's a very, very good submission grappler. He can scramble with a guy like Chiesa, but can he lock him down in a position out of one of those scrambles? I don't really think so.
No, it would be a quick strike thing, right? It would be Chiesa makes a mistake, leaves his head out there, shoots a shitty takedown in open space, leaves his neck out there and gets guillotined or gets his back taken.
And that's the kind of stuff Chiesa does to other people, but which I don't really see happening to him. Like, Lee had to lock him into back control and work for that choke.
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening. But, a lot of concerns about how Pettis responds. Chiesa is not a great defensive fighter. Are we overthinking this? If maybe Pettis just comes out and kicks him with his right leg in the body over and over and over until the fight's over? Like, that could happen.
I think that's the most likely scenario here, because I just don't think that Chiesa is a good enough, like, it's worth thinking about with Pettis, the quality and kind of guys who have beaten him.
Yeah.
Right. He got beaten by one of the premier pressure fighters in MMA in Rafael dos Anjos. He got beaten by, and in a fight that you and I both think that Pettis may have actually won against Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah.
That was a very close fight. He got beaten by a guy who just sold out on the pressure, but who is a good enough striker to not get eaten alive out in open space, in the spaces between. He got beaten up by a better kind of combination puncher and low kicker in Edson Barboza. He got beaten by Max Holloway, whom we've already talked about, and then he got beaten by Dustin Poirier in a pocket boxing kind of fight. Mm-hmm. All of those guys, all of them are capable of pressuring, except for Barboza, are capable of pressuring in a technical way in a fashion that Chiesa has never really shown.
Yeah.
So I do think we're kind of overthinking it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna side with Pettis. That was my feeling coming in, but with the very strong caveat that I think it's possible Chiesa could just stumble into the right approach. That if this becomes scrappy, if he has to fight for survival, he could, even without planning it, stumble into keeping pressure on Pettis just because, well, I'm getting kicked apart at range. I need to stay inside. I need to bring the fight to him. I need to chase the clinch. And if he can consistently tie Pettis up, he is tricky enough, strong enough, and weirdly shaped enough that he could drag him down to the ground from the clinch, and Pettis could have some serious problems. So,
I think because, yes, all of that is true. I just think that it's easy for us to forget given how critical we've been of Pettis over the years for good reasons, that those critiques have come from comparing him to the elite of the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
In the deepest division in the sport, with the best strikers in the sport, the greatest number of great strikers in any division in the sport.
Yeah.
That has been the comparison, the standard to which we have held Anthony Pettis. Michael Chiesa, God bless him, an Eastern Washingtonian. He is from my neck of the woods. I know Spokane and its environs well. Despite all that, I just don't. Chiesa is not those dudes. Could Chiesa win? Absolutely. He's the favorite. But I just think it's easy to forget that Anthony Pettis is still real fast, still kicks real hard, has a ton of experience, and maybe this is just me hoping, might have a few good fights left in him.
Oh, I think he does. Yeah, and I think we've seen that. Like there were glimpses of that in the Poirier fight. We have seen him making very small, but still, I think at this stage, significant adjustments to his own style. Yeah, I think like really the fact that I just can't imagine big, tall Michael Chiesa not being there for repeated body kicks is making me think that it's Pettis' fight. I'm keeping my mind open, but let's go ahead and move on. We're both siding with Pretty Tony, hoping for him to put on a nice run here at the end of his career. Let's talk about Paul Felder, Al Iaquinta. Both guys with sort of weird recent careers. Paul Felder, very high expectations when he first came to the UFC, training partner of Donald Cerrone. We were all excited about that. Kind of up and down, but it feels like he's found his footing now since then and has sort of settled into his style. Al Iaquinta, kind of hard to say what he's settled into because we were talking about this before the segment began, but his 2 fights ago for him, he fought Jorge Masvidal, and that was in 2015, and Masvidal's had like a whole other career since then. Meanwhile, Iaquinta has only thrashed a very old and very fragile Diego Sanchez, and it's hard to say how he stacks up against like an evenly matched opponent because we haven't seen it in a while and really don't know what kind of condition he's in. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's probably safe to say that this will play out as a striking and at most clinch match.
Yeah.
I don't think either guy is real likely to look for takedowns here. It wouldn't be shocking if Iaquinta looked for a takedown, but he has, as time has gone on, he has leaned increasingly heavily on his striking game. And like, again, it's hard to say from a fight that was literally 3 years ago against Jorge Masvidal, but like he kind of looks for, he would look for takedowns just to grab a leg and open up his shots upstairs more than really pursuing those takedowns. So
I don't think I'd be entirely shocked if Felder went for a takedown either. Opportunistically, I think he's that kind of, I think he's a thinking man's fighter. He keeps his mind open for like, well, okay, he's putting pressure on me. Now I need to change it up. But yeah, we're looking at two guys who want to engage in a striking battle.
Yeah, and we'll probably be willing to give it to each other.
Yeah.
In that scenario, I think Iaquinta works a little faster. He throws probably better combinations, like better punching combinations on the feet. Felder is probably a little more dangerous at kicking distance, probably has a better jab, and is probably a little more dangerous in the clinch. So that's a tough fight to call, you know? I mean, I think if it's a pocket boxing match, it's probably Iaquinta's to lose, though he's hittable. If it's all the way in or all the way out, it's probably more likely to be Felder's.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards Felder, not dramatically, but I'm leaning towards Felder. I mean, recent activity is always something I like, but it's the particular ways in which Iaquinta is hittable that I'm glad you brought that up because people talk about Iaquinta's boxing, and of course that is what he likes to do, but he's a front foot fighter who, his chin kind of lingers there, and he will move his head, but usually as part of like, I've attacked you, now I'm moving my head. He gets caught by surprise a lot, and it's hard not to when you are so front foot heavy.
It's reactive head movement rather than proactive head movement, which is a distinction. Where did this come up? We were talking about somebody. Was this last week when we were talking about defense?
Yeah.
Yeah. it's reactive head movement in the sense that if you throw at him, he will try to move his head to avoid it, rather than his head constantly being moving off the center line as a function of his defensive skills in general, which is the way that like Jose Aldo's head is always moving off the center line.
Yeah, he's not always like securing a strong position where you can't hit him. He's like, we're in a neutral position. When you try to hit me, I'll try not to get hit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's hard not to be in those neutral positions when you're a front foot boxer. When your head is kind of leaned over your front leg, you're there, you are ready. Your first response to almost everything is to throw a combination back at it.
Yeah, and it's like with Yoel Romero and Robert Whitaker both. They're both of those dudes. Their heads are just always moving. You know, they're always kind of like bobbing, and they're always kind of bobbing and moving side to side, and they're very slightly lowering or raising the level off of whatever that kind of neutral point is. Iaquinta's is just there until you're like, okay, now it's time to move my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And Felder has really, like, the quality of his counter striking has never been a concern. It's been, can he build a game around that so that he's not just waiting? And he has somewhat solved that, I think, and looks more comfortable, looks more confident in just staying in range and bringing the fight to his opponents while still being able to counter and respond to their offense. Felder certainly understands how to keep his head in a protected position rather than finding one after he's struck at. And I think this is a very tactical bits and pieces kind of analysis. So often those are the ones where you're like, oh, the fight didn't look at all how I expected, so none of what I said was relevant. But if we get a striking match, I do think those things will be key. Felder's superior positioning, more of a focus on defense and counter-striking, and then at longer range, a more varied tool set. Very effective kicks from Paul Felder, and mean in the clinch, which should be handy with what I think is a pretty substantial height advantage over Iaquinta. So I am riding with the Irish Dragon here, I think.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking back here, because if you look at Felder's defense, right, it says he's actually not good defensively. If you look at the raw striking defense numbers, right, it's 52%. That's not good, especially for a guy who likes to be at range on the feet. What that really reflects, though, is Felder is surprisingly okay with getting low kicked and does not really defend body shots especially well, but he is very difficult to hit to the head.
Yes.
And Iaquinta is very much a headhunter. Like, he'll throw the occasional body shot and the occasional low kick, but really he is hunting for your chin. And if Iaquinta gets sucked into the kind of fight where he is hunting for Felder's chin, Felder is, without just like chopping what's available. That's how people beat Felder on the feet, is by taking what's there, is by kicking his body, kicking his legs, punching his body. And Iaquinta is a guy who really wants to hit you in the chin.
Yeah, because it's a deliberate choice on Felder's part to leave his legs and his body behind, so to speak, in order to protect his chin. He's quite hard to hit clean to the head.
Yeah, because his head is pretty much always moving.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty much always moving off the center line. He is not a guy who it's easy to square up and land a bunch of shots on.
So if you can fight him like Edson Barboza, where you're comfortable with whatever range he wants and just taking whatever targets he gives you, you can beat him pretty decisively. Even in a fight that is still kind of competitive feeling, you can just be always finding targets. But if you're chasing the chin and you're primarily boxing, I think you're giving away too much of the fight to Felder.
Yeah. I also kind of think that Felder probably just reads and adjusts a little better than Iaquinta does. I don't know. That's my sense. But so I agree. I'm going to go with Felder also. Though I do think quite highly of Iaquinta. I think he's a good fighter. It's just, I think this is kind of a tough matchup for him. Yeah,
and we don't know how rusty he is and so on and so forth. Felder's been active. Those things do factor in. So, yeah, both going with Felder. UFC 223 is looking real good to me, man. Even with the loss of the original main event, just the idea of Holloway, Khabib, and what might spring out of that matchup is enticing enough. We still have another title fight that I am very excited to see, and this undercard is looking very tasty indeed. So we hope all of you enjoyed this today's episode of Heavy Hands. We hope you are looking forward to this card as much as we are. Before we wrap up, let's go ahead and tell you what we have coming out this week. I'm sure some writing plans have changed for you, Pat, along with the direction of Tony Ferguson's knee.
Yeah, I am actually not writing anything about this card. I just have an episode of Tides of History coming out very shortly about the Age of Discovery and kind of the medieval background to Columbus and Vasco da Gama and people like that, and where all that came from. I don't know how much writing I'm going to be doing moving forward. I just don't know that I have time for it.
Yeah, I only said it because last week I know you mentioned you would probably do something on Khabib Ferguson, but I guess this card actually does suck, and we shouldn't be excited. Pat's not writing anything, so fuck it. Okay, skip it. Rewatch Joshua versus Parker instead. Yeah. As for me, what do I have coming out this week? Well, I am working on a piece that is dissecting the unique and I think in some ways game-changing nature of Khabib Nurmagomedov's ground and pound. His approach, many people who have listened to me and read my work for a while know, I'm quite fascinated by the technical ins and outs of ground and pound, that skill set which is almost entirely unique to MMA and which to this day people don't really talk about from a technical perspective. And it's one of those places where like all the aspects of MMA come together in that area of the game, and Khabib Nurmagomedov has mastered a certain way of approaching that part of the game. So I'm definitely going to write something on Khabib's ground and pound, or at least that's the plan. And as I noted last week, there is a piece I have that's almost entirely finished, that's just been sitting unpublished. That's a breakdown of Calvin Kattar's last fight with Shane Burgos, which was a phenomenal technical back and forth striking battle. And Kattar versus Moicano is one of the more tantalizing features on the undercard of 223, so that will be prescient as well. Look forward to those things. Look forward to this weekend's card and next weekend's heavy hands. And thank you all for listening. Find us on social media, if you please. Twitter is usually the best place for that. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman, and I am at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. You can also find the both of us on Facebook.com/Patrick Wyman MMA or /Connor Ruebusch MMA. And otherwise, we will catch you all next week. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you definitely came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. It's a little sense of ritual, even, you know.
Exactly.